Hello, and welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we'll be talking about Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and his years of pilgrimage from 2014. Personally, I think this book is very in line with Tokyo Blues from 1987 and South of the Border West of the Sun from 1999, a sort of unofficial trilogy of books about young adults trying to move on from their past to finally start living in the present. If you like any of these three, you will probably like the other two. While they have elements of magical realism, except for Tokyo Blues, they are the most bound to reality, alongside Hear the One Sing and Pinball 1973, Murakami's very first novels. From here, there will be some spoilers and some talk about sexual violence, so you are warned. This book is a little bit like a puzzle. This is the story about 5 friends from school. 4 of them have the name of a color in some part of their Japanese names. The 2 boys, red and blue, and the girls who are black and white. And then there's our protagonist, who is the colorless one. He doesn't have a color in his name. When they finish high school, Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki leaves to study in the big city and grows apart from the other 4. One day he tries to call his friends, but he is told, by Red if I'm not mistaken, to never speak to them ever again. Tsukuru Tazaki goes into a deep depression that he never quite recovers from. He has another friend for a while, but that one doesn't last. And one day he meets this girl. He wants to go big with this girl, but she asks only one thing from him: to go back to his hometown and try to talk to his former friends. Try to find out why they didn't want to talk to him anymore, so he can close this dark period of his life to start a new one with her. By the way, she is clearly cheating on him. On one hand, she's the one pushing him to heal this wound from his past, but on the other hand, she is a cheater. It's very interesting that this book came soon after 1Q84 because the characters have this sort of moral ambiguity, as in the aforementioned book. No one is really completely good or completely bad. People are much more complex, and Murakami reflects this very well in this book. And so, eventually, he goes back to his old town. He meets with Red and Blue, and they both tell him the same thing. The girl with black in her name said that he raped her. Of course, no one will believe her, in part because she was already kinda crazy, and in part because our colorless protagonist was in a different part of the country at the time. It was straight up impossible. But they were faced with 2 options: to be assholes to her and not believe her in a moment where she needed them, or to go along with it and just cut ties with this old friend that they barely ever saw. Red and Blue make very clear that they did this for Black and because White was on Black's side, but they never actually believe her. And they can't ask Black what's the truth because she's dead. There's clues all across the book about who the real rapist is, but they never put it together. But maybe if you pay close attention, you may be able to put it together. I won't spoil it for you, especially because you might have a different interpretation, and that's alright. If you can't figure it out by yourself, just go online and I think it's the predominant theory in the internet. Anyways, our protagonist travels to Europe to meet with the girl we will call White. It is a long journey until they met, but it's an interesting one. Basically, she admits to him she fucked up. She doesn't know who the real rapist is, but she was 100% sure that it wasn't our colorless protagonist. But, as Red and Blue already explained, they had that friend right there in front of them, Black, in the middle of a mental breakdown after being raped, and they wanted to help her and not treat her like a liar, so they choose to pretend that they believe her lie. This is a very interesting twist because there's supposed to be a mystery, yet White tells our protagonist exactly what Red and Blue already told him, and that's the resolution of the book. The truth was there all along, and it was not much of a mystery after all, which is kinda brilliant. But the real resolution to his internal problem is when our protagonist tells his former friends that he always felt like he was just the fifth one of the group, that he didn't fit there. He wasn't like the rest of them, because he didn't have a color in his name. And White pretty much tells him to grow up, and that the color thing was just a joke, and that he was actually the best of them, the funniest, the smartest, that she was in love with him. But our protagonist never paid attention to White because he only had eyes for Black. Then, when our protagonist went away to move on with his life, they wouldn't even get together except if he was in town. And after the whole rape accusation thing, the group broke up because it was not the same without him. That this whole thing about him being the outcast of the group was just in our protagonist's imagination, a product of his low self-esteem, and that the whole idea that they broke up their friendship with him because they didn't like him, that was also in his imagination. He was the only one everyone liked, and all of these meetings with him as adults really showed that. The real missing piece of this entire mystery was that we were getting the story through the eyes of our protagonist, who has a really bad self-esteem. That's why we weren't getting the real story. This woman, White, cannot even comprehend the fact that our protagonist truly felt rejected, that he couldn't move on with his life, that he just accepted that everyone hated him for no reason, and he didn't investigate it further. He never called again. He never went back to town to talk to them, until over a decade later, just because this new girl told him to do it. Anyways, this book has two mysteries. One is the identity of the rapist of Black, and the second one is what happens after the final scene of the book. Because the book ends in a very odd moment, which is kinda genius. If you believe in magic, you can assume one outcome for the book. And if you don't believe in magic, you're kinda able to figure out what the other resolution really is. Because at one point of the book, there's a sort of prediction. And if you believe in magic, right after the book ends, the protagonist should die. But if you don't believe in magic, he should be alive and well. So it's really open-ended. It's not about what you want to happen to him, but rather about what you believe. Do you believe in magic? This is a great read. There's no much objective analysis to make because there's a lot open to personal interpretation, and I think that's why you should give it a try. There's a super interesting take on the mystery genre, and it has a search for an answer where you learn more from the journey than from the answer itself to the mystery. You can get Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage pretty much anywhere where good books are sold. If you want to support this podcast, or you just like cool t-shirts, or maybe coffee mugs or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find all of that and more, featuring the covered artwork for this episode, inspired by Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. There will be one design for each episode release of this podcast.